Mr. President, thank you for inviting CBN News here into the White House, the People's House. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David.
Let me start. Well, by the way, do you like Mr. President or Mr. Trump?
You can call me anything you want.
I'll call you Mr.
You've
President.
known me a long time.
Wonderful. Let's start with the Supreme Court. I know you're narrowing down the list. I know you've talked about who you kind of have an idea of who's going to be this person. But let me ask you, where does the final result lie? In other words, is it a gut instinct for you? Because they're all good on this list. So what's the bottom line factor when deciding?
Well, I think also it's who's going to get approved. And, you know, we have to go through a process after I pick the person that I'm going to be picking, who I think I know, but I'm not 100%. I can't guarantee it. We're doing some further checking. The vetting, they call it the vetting process, and the vetting process is very, very strong. But we have all 20 are fantastic people. You know, I put out 20 for the election. I said, these are the people I'll pick. And I think that the person that I pick will be a big, I think people are going to love it. I think evangelicals, Christians will love my pick and will be represented very, very fairly.
Let me ask you about the embassy in Israel.
Yes.
As it relates to moving this embassy to Jerusalem. Evangelicals, it's important for evangelicals. Are you committed to doing that?
Well, I'm looking at it. We're studying it. As you know, we discussed this before. We're studying it very, very long and hard. You know, it's a very big decision because every president for the last number of presidents, large number, they've come in and they were going to do it, and then all of a sudden they decide they don't want to get involved. It's a big decision, but we're studying the issue right now. I've always liked the concept of doing it. I will tell you that. I'll have a decision in the not too distant future.
Are the chances good?
Well, there's certainly a chance of it, absolutely. But we're doing very detailed studies on that, and we'll come out very soon. I hate to do that because that's not usually me, studies.
Right.
It's usually I do what's right. But this has two sides to it. It's not easy. And I'll make a decision over the not too distant future.
Let me ask you about the Muslim Brotherhood real quick. You've had some critical words for them in the past when we've spoken. There is a decision to be made about the Muslim Brotherhood as it relates to whether or not they are a terrorist organization. Do you believe they are?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of things going on, and that's another one. I don't want to keep putting you off, but I am having a meeting on that next week.
Okay.
And there's some bad stuff going on. You know it, and I know it. So we'll see what happens. But I have a meeting on that next week. I'll let you know.
All right. Let me ask you a little bit about Latinos in this country. You've talked about you're going to be a great jobs president.
Right.
And you believe the Latino community has heard you on that to a degree.
And we did very well with the Latino community. People were shocked.
Better than Romney.
Better than Romney, better than just about for a long way. I mean, better than a lot of people thought possible, or I wouldn't have won. They're a great community. They're a phenomenal community, spirit, hardworking. And, you know, the Cuban Americans, I got 84% of that vote, and they voted in big numbers. So we did really well with that community. So go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, what can you say to some in that community that have some trepidation, that think they are under attack by this administration coming in? What's your message to them?
Well, I think I've really solved that because, you know, the election was not long ago, and we had a great victory. We had a victory that nobody thought was possible, 306. Remember, they said there is no path to 270 for Trump. Trump can't win because there's no path. And I kept going up to Maine, where Maine had won, and we won it. But we didn't need it because we won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida. We won so many, North Carolina. So, you know, I really focused very heavily on the Latino community or the Hispanic community. And it was something that I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the numbers we got. They want protection, and they want jobs. And they don't want people pouring across the border that they have no idea who they are. And one of the reasons I did so well with the Hispanic community is the fact that they do want jobs and they do want protection, and they know that I'm going to take care of that. And I've already been producing the jobs because Ford and General Motors and many other companies, even Fiat Chrysler in terms of the car companies, but so many other types of companies, they're pouring back into our country now. They want to be here. Lower taxes. We're lowering taxes big league, including for the middle class, including for people, not just business taxes, but we're lowering business taxes and companies are pouring back in.
Speaking of taxes, this 20% border tax, or at least this tax on Mexico or imports from Mexico into the United States, how serious are you about something like that?
Well, it's something that I have the right to do. It's something that I can impose if I want. We are getting along actually very well with the Mexican government. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that that is a strong move going forward? Do you see, or
well,
do you need to work
with? It's an option. It's certainly an option. I can do that. I can do it if I want. But we're dealing with the Mexican government. I just had a conversation with the Mexican government, actually, with the president of Mexico. He's a very good man. And we'll see where it all goes. We'll see what happens.
Can you give us a sense of what that conversation was like?
Oh, a very warm conversation. We're talking, we're speaking, and we're going to see what happens.
What about this, if there was some sort of tax on imports, what about the argument that you've heard before about that indeed it'll be passed along to consumers? What's the argument?
Well, I think some of it may get passed along, but it also creates jobs. So I'm not against something like that, but with respect to Mexico, something else could happen which would be much more positive for both Mexico and the United States.
The media. I know we only have a limited amount of time. You could talk for an hour and a half about the media.
You mean fake news?
Well, that's what you are calling.
Well, much of it is fake news. I mean, much of the media makes up stories. It's amazing. I speak to people, great people, people that voted for me, and they get it better than most people get it. But much of the media is distorted and fake. And you can see it. I won't, mention specific networks as an example or newspapers. But I read stories that they write that are knowingly false. They're knowingly false. They know it's a lie. And they write them anyway. And the headlines. And in the end, the media has now a 17% approval rating, which is shocking. I think I've done a lot of that. I think I've brought it down because I at my rallies I'll speak and they'll turn around and the people will start, going pretty wild against them. We want truthful media. We don't have truthful media. We have people that are, in many cases, I actually think they're sick people because some of the stories are so bad. For instance, in the Oval Office, we have a beautiful bust of Dr. Martin Luther King. And they took that bust and they said that I removed it. I never removed it. In fact, I admired it when I first walked in. They said, I walked in and I had it removed. And all of a sudden, there's major headlines all over the world that I removed the bust of Dr. Martin Luther King, which I'd never do because, again, a man that I have great respect for and have admired over the years greatly. And I call my people, why did you take that bust out? I wasn't here. Who took it out? I mean, believe me, I wasn't so nice. Who took it out? And they said, sir, it was never touched. In fact, they were all nervous. They said they ran to the office just to make sure. It turned out it was there. Well, the person that wrote this was Time Magazine. The person that wrote this said, I removed the bust. It turned out that somebody was standing in front of the bust so that he couldn't see. The bust is this big, right? It's like that. Somebody was standing in front of it. That's fake news. That's fake news. Now, the apology, you know what it was? I don't even know if anybody gave an apology.
I think it was something on Twitter, possibly.
Maybe it was at Twitter. I had headlines all over the world. And I'll tell you, it's a very serious thing because what they're doing is they're saying I'm a racist. See, they're not saying I removed the bust. They're saying I'm a racist. That's fake news. These people are bad people.
Steve Bannon, one of your top advisors, just the other day to the New York Times, called the media the opposition party. Do you believe that?
I think to a large extent they're much more capable than the other side. I think the media, I think the media is the opposition party in many ways. And I think that, and I'm not talking about all media. I know people like yourself, but I know people in the media that I have tremendous respect for, respect them as much as anybody. So I'm not talking about everybody, but a big portion of the media, the dishonesty, the total deceit and deception makes them certainly partially the opposition party, absolutely. I think they're much more capable than the opposition party. The opposition party is losing badly. Now, the media is on the opposition party's side. And I actually said to myself, I say, they treat me so unfairly, it's hard to believe that I won. But the fortunate thing about me is I have a big voice. I have a voice that people understand. And you see it now. We're bringing back jobs. Ford is making a massive investment now in Michigan. General Motors is going to be making, just magnificent investments. So many other companies are coming back in. But yeah, the media is is a disgrace. And they've called me wrong from the beginning. I mean, New York Times has called me wrong from the beginning.
And underestimated you.
They actually apologized to their readers. They lost a lot of subscriptions because not because the readers even like me. They said, how inaccurate could you be? Because if you read the New York Times, there was no chance that Trump was going to win. And yet we'd go out there and I'd feel I was going to win based on the crowds. You saw the crowds better than anybody. So it's a very interesting fact.
Let me switch gears, and it wouldn't be an interview between us if I didn't ask a God question, if you will. How has that spiritual journey been for you, especially being here and knowing the gravity of the office? Do you feel the need to pray more? Where are you on that?
Well, I tell you what, I've always felt the need to pray. So I would say that the office is so powerful that you need God even more, because your decisions are no longer, gee, I'm going to build a building in New York, or I'm going to do that. These are questions of massive life and death, even with regard to health care. We're working very hard on health care. But there you're talking about life and death, and you're talking about better lives, people living better because they have better health care at a lower price, which we're working very hard on. So yeah, you realize these decisions are also important. There's almost not a decision that you make when you're sitting in this position that isn't a really life-altering position. So God comes into it even more so.
There's a lot of people. I remember when we were in California on your golf course, a beautiful golf course, I might add.
That I may never see again.
I understand.
I may never see it again.
Which is disheartening.
It's okay. It's all right. We're doing something much more important.
We talked about you tweeting at the time, and I'm wondering nowadays as president, what's the filter here? I mean, are you calling this out? Are you doing it yourself? How does this work now?
Well, the media is very dishonest, and if they were honest, I wouldn't bother doing it, because I wouldn't have to do it, because I could call somebody up and I could give them the information, or I could issue a press release or something, or I could have some kind of a conversation. Look, I've had conversations with the media. I think I understand the media. Nobody really understands the media, in all fairness, but I've had conversations with people where, rather than Twitter, I will call and give them information that on a message I want to get out, and the message will be totally distorted. And I'll call up, I'll say, that had nothing to do with what I told you. Well, I sort of thought this. I would tell you strongly, I'm up to, I think I'll soon be over 50 million people between Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and the different things.
Do you call it out to folks?
For instance, I could also go right into the White House, but mine is much better. I like @Real Donald Trump and we use POTUS, right, but I like @Real Donald Trump. But the beautiful thing about it, it's really a modern day form of communication. Right. I can do 140 or 280, or I can, you could extend them. All I do is ... right? And you extend it. So it really gets to be where you do have enough room if you need.
The flexibility on it.
But generally just in the 140. But I can do messages around the media and get my word out the way I mean my word. I don't have to have the media distort my message, because they go out of their way to distort my message. When the media takes my message, knows what my message is, and then writes it purposely so that it doesn't sound good, I'd rather do Twitter. And that's what I do.
There are a lot of folks that are going to want to judge these first 100 days. They're going to say this is a success, or they're going to have their own version of what a success is. For you, for these first 100 days, what is success for you exactly?
Well, I think it started on one of the greatest days of my life. I think the speech turned out very good. I got very good reviews on the speech. The only negative reviews was some people said it was dark. But many people thought it was very optimistic, because obviously it's dark. When you have people being shot every day in Chicago, and you have things like this happening, and when you look at the Middle East, and when you look at what's going on in North Korea, and when you look at all of these things that are happening, you can't say life is a bowl of cherries, right? But I got very good reviews on the speech. We had a tremendous crowd. The crowd was great, but the overall audience was, I think, the biggest ever to watch an inauguration address, which was a great thing. That was also distorted in the media. They fought that as much as they could. But it turns out it was probably the largest audience ever to watch an inauguration address.
Why is it important for you to win on something like that? Because you haven't given that up. You want to make sure they understand.
Yeah, because
what is it?
I'm representing a lot of people, the forgotten people in many cases. and in many cases not the forgotten people, people generally, but many people that are the forgotten people. And they've been forgotten by the media that tries to distort them out of life. And so when I had that massive crowd and they'd show a picture of an emptier area, we had a tremendous crowd. But the audience, which was the word used by Sean during the press conference, and he used the word audience right in his first thing, is, and I think it's indisputable, but if it's not, it's certainly very close, but I think it was the largest audience ever. I want the forgotten people to understand that we're not forgotten anymore. And now the Democrats are after those people because, frankly, they can't win an election without those people.
So we're wrapping up here, but a couple last questions. On 100 days, is it important for you to have some sort of tax reform bill on your desk, or do you want at least the structure in place?
Well, at least the structure, because it takes a certain period of time statutorily. You file, and then you have to wait, and then you file again, and you do something, and you do an amendment. And so there is a structural component and a statutory component. So where you have to wait days, one of those little problems in life, but it's not actually a bad thing. And we also have health care that we're working on. And we're working on other things. And one of the things I said that I'm going to try very hard to get done during my term, and I'll get it done, is the Johnson Amendment for evangelicals, for Christians, for everybody of faith, where we're going to try and end and terminate the Johnson Amendment, which is a disaster for religion, in my opinion.
It's a priority for you.
It's a priority, absolutely.
Okay, last question, because I know we have to run. Persecuted Christians, we've talked about this overseas. The refugee program that, or the refugee changes you're looking to make, as it relates to persecuted Christians, do you see them as kind of a priority here?
Yes.
You do?
Yes, they've been horribly treated. Do you know, if you were a Christian in Syria, it was impossible, at least very, very tough to get into the United States. If you were a Muslim, you could come in. But if you were a Christian, it was almost impossible. And the reason that was so unfair is that everybody was persecuted, in all fairness, but they were chopping off the heads of everybody, but more so the Christians. And I thought it was very, very unfair. So we are going to help them.
Mr. President, a pleasure. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
That was
David.
great.